Have you ever looked at a young child, maybe your grandchild, a niece, a nephew, and thought, what on earth are they thinking? One moment they're laughing so hard they can barely breathe, and the next they're sulking in a corner over something as tiny as the way you cut their toast. It can feel like trying to read a book in a foreign language with half the pages missing. And if you're helping raise a young one at this stage in your life, you might wonder why things feel so much harder than you remember from when your own kids were small. The truth is, today's children are growing up in a world that's louder, faster, and more demanding than ever before. And as adults, especially those of us over 60, it's easy to feel a little out of step with the new parenting styles, new expectations, and all the emotional intensity that comes with raising kids in this day and age. But here's the thing, understanding a child doesn't require the latest trends, the perfect books, or even endless energy. It comes down to something more timeless, observation, empathy, and just a little curiosity. And when we start to truly understand what's going on beneath the surface of their behavior, something shifts. Life gets simpler. The constant power struggles ease up. And those little moments of joy start to shine through more clearly. In this video, we're talking about 6 ways to understand your child, or grandchild, a little better, and how that understanding can help you both feel more connected and a whole lot happier. You don't need to change who you are. You just need a few new ways to see the world through their eyes. Let's start with something simple but incredibly powerful, slowing down to really watch and listen. That might sound too basic to matter, but most of us are so used to reacting, to tantrums, to messes, to endless questions, that we forget to simply notice. A child might not always tell you what they need with words, but their actions are full of clues. That clinginess after a busy day? It might mean they're overstimulated. That anger after a change in plans? That could be sadness in disguise. There's a little boy I know, about 4 years old, who used to throw a fit every time his grandmother came to pick him up from daycare. She'd walk in with her warm smile and a bag of snacks, ready to spend a lovely afternoon with him, but he'd cross his arms, turn away, and sometimes even yell at her. At first, she was hurt. She thought he didn't want to be with her. But after a few days, she tried something different. Instead of jumping in with questions and snacks, she just sat beside him quietly and watched. That's when she noticed, every time she arrived, he was in the middle of something, building, coloring, playing, and being pulled away felt like a loss. Not because he didn't love her, but because his little world was being interrupted. So the next time, she knelt beside him, looked at what he was doing, and said, "Tell me about this tower you're building. Can I help?" His eyes lit up. They played together for a few minutes, and when it was time to go, he came willingly, hand in hand, chatty and calm. That's the power of noticing. Of stepping into their world before asking them to step into yours. Now, another piece of the puzzle is remembering that behavior is communication. When a child is acting out, whether it's defiance, whining, or plain old grumpiness, they're not usually trying to give you a hard time. More often, they're having a hard time. And that behavior is their way of saying, something's off, and I don't know how to fix it. I know that in our day, when a child misbehaved, the response was usually to correct it quickly, maybe with a stern word or a consequence. That's what we knew, and often, it worked in the short term. But today, we're learning more about how a child's brain works. And the science tells us something important: kids can't reason or self-soothe when they're overwhelmed. What they need first is connection. That doesn't mean letting them get away with bad behavior. It just means pausing to ask, what is this behavior trying to tell me? That's not being permissive. It's being wise. There's a difference between a child who won't listen because they're being defiant, and one who can't listen because they're emotionally flooded. And when we can tell the difference, we respond differently. A harsh tone or timeout might work for one, but completely miss the mark with the other. But a calm voice, a hand on the shoulder, or just sitting with them quietly for a minute can sometimes do more than any lecture ever could. It reminds me of a grandfather who told me his 5-year-old granddaughter would always burst into tears when it was time to leave the park. For months, he thought she was just being spoiled or difficult. But one day, instead of rushing her, he asked, Is it hard to leave because you're still having fun? And she nodded through her tears and said, yes. It always feels too fast. So the next time, they started a new ritual, a 5-minute warning, a countdown, and one last swing together. And the tears? They stopped. Not because she stopped caring, but because she felt seen. Understanding doesn't always require big changes. Sometimes it's the smallest shift in how we look at a child that makes all the difference in the world. Now that we've touched on the importance of slowing down to observe and recognizing behavior as a form of communication, let's take that deeper. Because as we begin to understand what our children are telling us, without words, we begin to build something even more powerful, trust. Because trust, when it's built slowly and steadily, becomes the bridge that connects two people across even the widest emotional gap. When a child feels that they can trust you to listen, to try to understand, and to respond with kindness, even when they're at their worst, they stop fighting you. And you stop feeling like you're in a constant battle. Trust isn't built in the big, dramatic moments. It's built in the quiet ones. When you keep your word, when you follow through, when you say, I'll be right back, and then you really are. When you take their feelings seriously, even if they seem silly from an adult's point of view. That's how trust grows. There's a story I'll never forget. An older woman told me about helping raise her grandson while his parents worked long hours. He had a habit of hiding whenever it was bath time, and it turned into a game of chase every night. She'd call, coax, sometimes even bribe. But one day, she tried something different. She sat on the floor in the hallway and said, I'm here when you're ready. And she just waited. After a few minutes, he peeked out from behind the curtain where he was hiding and said, You're not mad? And she shook her head. Nope. Just waiting, like I said. He came out on his own, took her hand, and said, Okay. I'm ready now. That moment changed everything for her. And for him. Because he realized that bath time wasn't a trap, and that his grandmother didn't need to control him to care for him. She needed to hold space for him. To let him know he was safe, even when he was resisting. Sometimes kids test us not to be difficult, but to make sure we're sturdy. To make sure our love doesn't disappear when they push a little. And when we stay steady, kind but firm, they learn to stop pushing quite so hard. Which leads us beautifully into another important part of understanding your child, remembering that your calm is their calm. When a child is worked up, whether they're scared, frustrated, overstimulated, or overtired, they don't need us to meet them with the same energy. They need someone to help regulate the storm. It's hard, especially when you're tired yourself. And let's be honest, grandparenting, or caregiving at this stage in life, isn't exactly a slow stroll through the park. It's exhausting sometimes. But the more we can ground ourselves in the moment, the more we give them the gift of calm. When your voice stays soft, your breath stays slow, and your tone stays warm, you become the safe harbor they can return to when their own waves feel too big. There's something beautiful about this, too. It reminds us that we still have the power to shape the mood of the room. Even after 60, we're not passive observers. We're the steady heartbeat that children learn to rely on. A grandmother once shared how she kept a small phrase taped to her kitchen cabinet, "My calm is contagious." She said it helped her when things got hectic, when shoes were lost, milk was spilled, or tears were flowing for no clear reason. She would pause, read the words, and breathe. And sure enough, the tone would shift. Not because the chaos disappeared, but because she didn't add to it. Children borrow our emotional state. They look to us, especially when their own emotions are spinning out. And while we don't have to be perfect, we just need to be present. That brings me to something else we don't always talk about enough, but it can change your whole relationship with your child or grandchild, asking curious questions instead of jumping to conclusions. When we assume, we often miss the truth. But when we're curious, we open a door. Instead of saying, "Why would you do that?" which usually comes off as judgmental, you might try, "Can you help me understand what happened?" That one shift in language tells a child, "I want to hear your side. I believe there's a reason behind this behavior." I knew one gentleman who raised his daughter years ago and was now helping raise his granddaughter. She once refused to eat dinner, flat out saying no to everything. He was about to say, "Fine, go to bed hungry," like he might have said decades earlier, but instead he asked, "Are you feeling okay?" That's when she burst into tears and said her stomach had been hurting all day, but she didn't want to miss out on story time by saying anything earlier. He told me, if I'd gone with my first instinct, I would have missed that completely. But his curiosity gave her a chance to share the truth. And it made her feel safe enough to tell it. When we shift from control to curiosity, from commanding to connecting, we not only understand more, we connect deeper. And when a child feels that, they become more cooperative. Not because we forced them to, but because we made them feel seen. So as we lean into these gentle tools, building trust, staying calm, and asking with curiosity, we find that raising or helping raise children isn't about having all the answers. It's about staying in relationship. Day after day, moment by moment. And if there's one more piece that brings all of this together, it's this: children learn how to treat others by how we treat them, especially when it's hard. Because what children experience in their closest relationships becomes the foundation for how they treat others and how they treat themselves. If they're met with patience when they're clumsy, if they're offered forgiveness when they mess up, if they're spoken to with gentleness even when they're angry or loud or overwhelmed, they begin to believe that kindness isn't just something they're told to practice. It's something they receive, something they feel in their bones. And when that happens, they're far more likely to pass it on. It's easy to forget that little eyes are always watching. Not just when you're playing with them or reading a book, but in the quiet, in the background, in the moments you think don't matter. They're noticing how you speak to the cashier at the store, how you talk about others when you're in the car, how you respond to stress. And over time, they don't just listen to your words. They start to mirror your ways. That's why one of the most powerful things we can do to understand children better is to model the behavior we want to see in them. If we want them to speak with respect, we speak with respect, even when they don't. If we want them to apologize, we show them what that looks like by apologizing ourselves when we're wrong. If we want them to be resilient, we show them that it's okay to feel disappointment without falling apart. You see, when we live the values we hope to teach, we stop being just caregivers, we become guides. Quiet role models in everyday life. I remember a sweet story from a woman who helped raise her twin grandsons. She said one day she stubbed her toe on the edge of the couch and muttered something under her breath, nothing terrible, but not her finest moment. One of the boys turned to her and said, "Grandma, that's not a kind word." She laughed, admitted he was right, and said, "You're absolutely right." I was frustrated and let it slip. "Thank you for reminding me." That little exchange was so much more than funny. It was a moment where the child felt empowered to speak up kindly, and the adult showed that being human doesn't mean you stop trying to be better. Children don't need perfect adults, they need honest ones. Grown-ups who are willing to keep growing. And let's not forget, all of this, the trust, the calm, the curiosity, the modeling, it all leads to something we often overlook in day-to-day caregiving: joy. Not just the joy of a child giggling or the sweetness of bedtime cuddles, but a deeper kind of joy. The kind that comes from feeling like you really know each other. Like you're not just surviving the day, you're building a relationship that will last a lifetime. When you begin to understand your child, even just a little better, you find yourself spending less time correcting and more time connecting. You start to laugh more, even in the chaos. You notice the sparkle in their eyes when they tell you a story. You begin to recognize their little patterns, their quirks, their rhythms, and instead of being frustrated by them, you work with them. You might notice that they get cranky around 3 p.m., and instead of trying to power through an errand, you sit and have a snack together first. Or maybe you realize they struggle with transitions, so you build in extra time to shift between activities. These aren't grandparenting strategies. These are quiet acts of understanding. And they work. That's the heart of it, really. Parenting, or grandparenting, or simply loving and raising a child, isn't about controlling behavior. It's about understanding the person behind it. It's about being curious, being patient, being willing to learn even when you've already lived a full life. Because that's another beautiful thing about being 60 or older. You have lived. You've seen the seasons of life come and go. You've learned that the hard moments do pass. You know that love deepens when it's stretched. And now, you get to take all that wisdom and pour it into someone new, someone still finding their way, someone still forming their story. And maybe, just maybe, in helping them understand the world, you find a little more understanding for yourself, too. You soften toward the parts of yourself that weren't always calm, or patient, or perfectly equipped. You forgive the mistakes you made years ago. You realize that the most powerful thing you can offer isn't perfection, it's presence. So if no one's told you this lately, let me say it clearly, your presence matters. The way you show up, the way you listen, the way you love, especially on the hard days, it makes all the difference. If you've been walking through this season wondering if you're doing enough, just remember, every time you choose connection over correction, calm over control, and love over fear, you are planting seeds. Seeds that will grow into empathy, kindness, and confidence. Seeds that will shape the next generation, and maybe even heal something in your own heart, too. We're not meant to do this perfectly. We're just meant to do it with heart.